Soup season is here, and to me there's only one soup to rule them all, and that is a classic hearty Vietnamese beef pho. The combination of crystal clear umami-packed broth, perfectly cooked rice noodles, the most flavorsome beef crowned with a whole bunch of fresh and aromatic toppings is truly unbeatable. For a long time I've been trying to master the art of making pho at home, and I think I'm finally ready to share what I've learned. Let's begin. Now for starters, let's talk about something very important, and that is the word pho. Now pho does not just refer to the finished soup itself, pho also refers to the rice noodles in the soup. Those come in different sizes. I personally prefer L-sized. You just have to be sure you're going for the flat rice noodles, because there are also round rice noodles, and those are called bun, not pho. And using bun for pho is like using fusilli instead of spaghetti. To be sure you're going for the right kind, just look for the word bang pho on the packet. All you want to do for now is add those to a deep dish or a bowl, then cover with room temperature water to soak. That's all we gotta do for now. We're gonna get back to these in a bit. Next, let's talk about meat. There are different types of pho you can make. My personal favorite is the beef pho, also called pho bo, if I didn't butcher the pronunciation. And you're gonna need a couple of different cuts of beef to find the perfect balance of flavors. The first one we wanna talk about is this. This is beef shin, and it's a fantastic soup cut. Why? Well, first of all, you got a thick marrow bone right in the middle. And then around that marrow bone, we have plenty of super hard-working meat that is full of connective tissue that's gonna give us a nice, silky smooth broth. That is gonna form the backbone of our broth, no pun intended. You could also amp up those same flavors by adding more beef bones or oxtail, but if you can only go for one cut, bone and shin, it is. But then there's also this guy, beef chuck, which is sort of the neck of the beef. You could also use brisket, which is the breast of the beef. The main point here is that this is some of the meat that we're actually gonna slice up thinly and add to our pho later on. So while we're gonna cook that with our shins, we're actually gonna take this out a little sooner so it preserves a bit more flavor, and I'll tell you when. Last but not least, you wanna get some of these super thinly sliced beef steaks, which we're not actually gonna cook with the rest of the meat. We're gonna do something very special with them later. For now, let's start by working on our broth, and for that we need to first clean and purify some of our meat and bones, and let me show you how. First, you're gonna need a pot of boiling water. Add around 2 tablespoons of salt. Once the water comes up to a vigorous boil, that is the time to add all your heavier cuts like shins, bones, or oxtail. You wanna cook these on high heat for around 5 minutes, and what's gonna happen is a lot of the impurities, gunk, and dirt are gonna coagulate and come off the bones. Once the 5 minutes are up, you're gonna add your chuck, which is only gonna need around 2 minutes to purify. Do you see how cloudy and dirty this water got? Now we can carefully get out all of our meat. You can get rid of this dirty blanching water. And once our meat is safe enough to handle, we want to rinse it off very thoroughly in cool water and make sure to get rid of as many impurities as we can. The reason we go through all of this trouble of cleaning it is that one of the hallmarks of a really good pho is a crystal clear broth. And all this work we put into cleaning this beef is going to take us to just that point. Now you're going to need a pot of simmering water. Not boiling, simmering water. And the amount should be roughly twice as much as your meat by weight. I'm using 2.5 kilos of meat, so this is 5 liters of water. Now let's get all of our cleaned beef into our pot with the simmering water. You can cover your stock pot for now, but you have to be absolutely sure that at no point in this process the water is boiling. You only want it to simmer, otherwise all that hard work of purifying will have been for nothing. While our broth gets going, we want to work on our aromatics. Just some old friends here, ginger and onions. But we're not adding them straight to our broth. There's a very important signature step that we got to do first. First, trim the pointy end of your onions, then cut them in half top to bottom. Remove the papery peel and finish by carefully trimming the root end of your onion. But your ginger should be well washed. You want to flatten it against the cutting board and very carefully slice it in half horizontally, exposing as much surface area as possible. Now that signature step I've been talking about is charring your aromatics. You could do this in a hot skillet or even in the oven under a broiler, but to me the most convenient way to do that is using a kitchen torch and a good old pair of heat-proof tongs. Actually, never mind the tongs, a fork works much better. No matter which tool you go for, the general idea will always remain the same. You want to blast the cut sides of your aromatics with intense heat until they get a good amount of char. Don't fully blacken or burn them, of course, but give them a very significant amount of char. If you're wondering why exactly we're charring our aromatics, well, we're basically just unlocking different dimensions of the same flavor. So this is now not just a plain onion, it's now a roasted onion, a raw onion, and a par-cooked onion in the middle. Before we add our aromatics to the stock, you want to give it a quick check and see how the surface is looking. Do you see how this is not boiling but just simmering? I cannot stress this enough, this is important. Our surface is also looking super clean. There are no impurities floating on top to speak of. I was sitting here with a skimming spoon ready to, do some emergency cleanup, but we did such a bang-up job of cleaning our meat that right now there's nothing left to do. Which means we're ready to add our aromatics. The groundwork for our broth has been laid, and we can now just give this about 1.5 hours on a simmer, and then we'll check back in. In the meantime, let me share a quick word from this video's sponsor. I want to introduce you guys to ZBiotics, the pre-alcohol probiotic. If you're the kind of person that enjoys grabbing a drink with friends or simply likes to unwind at the end of the day but still has a busy schedule with important things the day after, ZBiotics is just right for you. One ZBiotics before you start drinking is all you need to enjoy your night or day and still look forward to tomorrow. ZBiotics works by producing an enzyme to break down the unwanted byproduct of alcohol in your gut. I mean, please drink responsibly and get plenty of rest as well, but ZBiotics will take care of the rest and make sure you feel refreshed the next day and can just get back to living your life. It's been invented by real PhDs who know what they're doing, so this is actual effective science, well tested, not just random ingredients. If you want to try ZBiotics yourself, use my promo code Andong to get 15% off your very first order. Just click the link in the video description below. That's promo code Andong for 15% off your very first order of ZBiotics. Thank you ZBiotics for sponsoring this video. Hi, remember our rice noodles from before? They've been soaking for around an hour while we've been working on our broth, but now, even though our broth is still far from done, it's actually a good time to start cooking them. At this stage, they're still uncooked, but at the same time, they're pliable enough so we can conveniently work with them. I like adding mine to a noodle strainer like this, but you could totally just do this in a regular pot. Because they've been soaking for quite a while, the noodles are already fully hydrated. That means we only need to cook them for a very short amount of time. Around 45 seconds was enough in my case. After that, you want to rinse them well under cold water, and you can do this in a colander in your sink, that will be enough. And then super briefly shock them again with hot water. The reason it's a great idea to cook your noodles at least half an hour before you're ready to serve your pho is that you can then rest them in a colander like this, which allows them to steam off a little bit and dry a little bit, which will result in a really pleasant texture later on. Mark my words. Our broth should be roughly halfway in by now, so let's give it a quick check. Still looking beautiful. There's a little bit of a layer of fat on top. That's fine because right underneath we can already see a crystal clear broth forming. Now around 2 hours in is a great time to remove our chuck because it's now nice and tender but still not completely falling apart, which is kind of what we want. Cover and rest, we'll get back to this guy later. Our broth is going to keep cooking for a little while longer, and in the meantime, let's prepare our signature pho spice mix. There is no one right spice mix for pho, but there are certain spices that you will find in a lot of different recipes. I would say the two spices without which pho wouldn't really be pho are star anise and cinnamon sticks. And by the way, use cassia cinnamon, that's East Asian cinnamon, not the type from Sri Lanka. They're a little bit different. The second most common spices are coriander seeds and black cardamom. Another two spices that are a little less common but still very popular are cloves and fennel seeds. I like to use a little bit of all of them, and even though pho is actually not that heavy on the spices, I like to use a little more than maybe most Vietnamese people would approve of. Toast over medium-high heat until super fragrant. And now we're finally ready to add our spice mix to the broth. Now here's the thing, the time between removing the chuck and adding the spices, what we did just now, can basically be as long as you want it to. You could even add a whole ton of beef bones and let your pho cook overnight. It's gonna be super flavorful. The important part is that once you add your spices, the clock is ticking. After 1 hour, the flavor of the spices will really start to mellow out and slowly disappear, which means that we're gonna cook these for 45 minutes to 1 hour tops. Another element we want to add during this final phase of cooking is a little bit of sweetness, and we're going to do this two ways. First of all, here are a few thick slices of daikon radish. We're going to add a couple of those to the pho, as well as one little nugget of rock sugar like this. You could totally use regular sugar, but most Vietnamese people will get angry. I will not. It's going to taste the same. Now, while we're on this final stretch, let's work on all of our fixings, which means all of the good stuff that's gonna go into our bowl of pho right before serving. And this will be the first thing we're working on. Remember our thinly sliced steaks? They're actually not thin enough just yet. Cover your steak with a silicone mat. If your meat looks like it has absolutely no will to live anymore, then you've done everything right. The reason we went through all this labor to get our meat this thin is because we are gonna add these slices straight into our bowl of pho, raw. We're gonna use the residual heat from the broth to cook them, so be sure they're super thin. Now we have a little bit of time, which we're gonna use very wisely by very thinly slicing up a white onion, also very thinly slicing up a bunch of spring onions. Then we grab another bunch of parsley, trim off the roots, which I personally love to add to the stock for a little bit, and then we chop this up real fine as well. Also, remember that piece of chuck we removed from the broth earlier? I let it rest in the fridge for a little bit. Now it got nice and firm, so I took the time and sliced it as thinly as I could right now, and we're gonna add that to our pho in a second. Many hours have passed in total. Let's go and strain it so we can finally have a bowl of pho. I'm straining this from one stock pot into another one, and then right back into the first one through a fine mesh strainer. Another super important step is to now check your almost finished pho broth for seasoning. And this is already very good. It has a nice subtle hint of sweetness, which is perfect. But what's definitely missing right now is saltiness and umami, which we can fix by adding a little bit of salt, but even more importantly, fish sauce. You might remember last week's video where I made pizza and I also used fish sauce. That time I used Red Boat fish sauce. When I'm making pho, I want something that has a little bit of a different vibe, and for that vibe, my favorite is Three Crabs brand. This one is awesome. Let's add a very healthy glug. I would say like a quarter cup or so. Oh, this amount was perfect for me, but when you cook pho, I would recommend going a little at a time so you don't over salt, because you know, going back is kind of difficult. Let's check out a bit of our broth. This is not the clearest broth I've seen in my entire life, but it's looking pretty good. Plus, don't forget, we just agitated the hell out of this soup, so it's gonna settle in a bit, and I'm actually pretty happy. Yes. I hope you remember our rice noodles. They've been hanging around for quite a while, and if yours have clumped up like this, don't worry. All you gotta do is add just a little bit of water, and check this out, like magic, they come right apart. Works with Italian pasta too, by the way. Now you wanna take one serving of noodles and put it in a little noodle strainer like this. Quickly dip the noodles into hot water to warm them up right before serving. We just don't wanna add cold noodles to our super hot pho. And now we can finally assemble our bowl of homemade pho. A small pinch of raw onions goes on the bottom of the bowl. Then our reheated rice noodles. Okay, maybe that was a little much. A couple slices of beef chuck, a few slices of our thinly pounded steak, and then into the bowl we're adding a generous sprinkle of spring onions, as well as an even more generous sprinkle of cilantro. And finally, of course, some of our broth. Make sure it's super hot, it should basically still be simmering. And now the great moment of truth where everything finally comes together. But you know what's still missing? This. The perfect plate of extra toppings. This is exactly the way I've had pho in Ho Chi Minh City earlier this year, and I absolutely love it. We got some sawtooth cilantro. It looks freaky, but tastes almost exactly like cilantro, actually. And then we got Thai basil. And for some reason, adding those straight to the pho would not be right. You have to add them on the side. Then, of course, we got limes, thinly sliced red chili. But in the end, all of these are optional, because this is the real essence of pho. And don't you even think of adding sriracha or hoisin sauce to this before you've tried it the way the chef served it to you. We have spent hours and hours cooking this pho. It is about 3 a.m. now, but we're about to taste this pho. First, a fresh sip of broth. The depth of this meaty broth is just, you know what? We've made it this far into the video without pho jokes, but this tastes phenomenal. I also didn't have regular chopsticks, so I'm using these. Why not? The texture is so good. That noodle texture is actually phenomenal. You might see a few broken noodle bits in here. That's just because we handled the noodles so much for filming. It's not really a recipe issue. Let's try some meat. Somehow I'm much better at cooking pho than I am at eating pho. I got a piece of chuck as well as a piece of steak, all in one bite. Awesome. Let's squeeze some lime into this. Yo! I wish I'd be faking those reactions. I'm not. Where was I? Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you make this pho. The recipe is on my website, and I'm gonna see you in the next one.